Okay, so this is going to be our first unit. It's actually Unit 2. Unit 1 is our orientation unit for the course with the syllabus and how everything runs. So this word right here, scarcity, is pretty much the reason for the course. This is a term that you're definitely going to need to know, and it basically drives every decision you make in life. The idea that we have scarcity is the idea that we have limited amounts of resources to meet unlimited wants and needs. And so because we can't have everything we want or we need, there's always a limit reached. We'll have to make choices. And so you want to know a lot of these terms such as wants, needs, scarcity. And a very important point, please read that scarcity is not the same thing as a shortage where there's just not enough goods being offered for sale. A lot of times the reason you might see a shortage is simply because the price isn't high enough to make it worth a company's time and effort and energy and everything they have to put into it, their costs. And when that price goes up and they can make more money, then they'll have more of an incentive to replace the goods that are short. But scarcity is a permanent condition, and so that's a key thing there. One of the terms we're not really mentioning in the notes, but it's this idea of marginal utility, this idea that satisfaction is what utility means, and so we're trying to satisfy our needs and wants, and so we make these choices. Now, to make goods and services, which is what a company does, they will make goods and services to meet our needs and wants, knowing that we will probably pay them money for their goods and their services. To make any kind of good or service, you need what we call factors of production, and they're listed here. Go over these terms very well. For instance, land isn't just soil or a piece of land like acreage. A lot of times it's anything that is natural in terms of a resource. So if it's a naturally occurring resource used to make goods and services, it's land. You can see labor there. Capital would be human-made resources, so they're not natural. But there's two types, so definitely know the difference between physical capital and human capital. And you can kind of follow this chart here because an entrepreneur is the one that's responsible for assembling all of these. Now, opportunity cost is probably the second most important term you want to know for this course after scarcity. Opportunity cost is the single most desired choice that one gives up when making a decision. And so that's very important. And to be able to make a choice, you have to have lots of different options, trade-offs. Okay? And the most valuable thing that you give up is your opportunity cost. So if you choose to go to a certain restaurant, you have to know that your trade-offs are all the particular restaurants you could have gone to. But which one is the most valuable restaurant you did not go to? Meaning, if you didn't choose the one you chose, this would probably be the next one chosen. You have to know that so that you know that if the choice you made was the right one. If there's something you want more than the choice you made, you're probably not making the choice you want. So this is involving this idea of thinking at the margin, weighing out the costs and the benefits. We might say it's a cost-benefit analysis. And you can see some examples down there at the bottom, and so make sure you go over those. And this kind of goes into it a little bit more, and you can see it from a what we'll call a supply perspective, which we'll hit in the next unit. But, a toy company will have some investment costs. They have to buy the machinery, the capital, physical capital, the material, which could be physical capital or land if it's natural. And then, of course, they pay the labor, and you can see it costs them $10 per toy. But after that initial purchase of the machinery, to purchase more materials and labor, they already have the machines. They could actually produce more goods and services. So when they think to themselves, should we spend $2,000 to make more, they're thinking at the margin. They weigh out those costs and those benefits. And as you can see from the chart here, when they don't have to buy the machinery, their cost goes down considerably, and so they're going to be able to make quite a bit, especially if they're pricing the good for customers to buy at a higher amount than the cost. So one thing we can use, and you're going to have a series of videos that you can watch on this as well, is what we call a production possibility curve, and it's simply a tool to show alternative ways to use an economy's productive resources. And so I want you to look through this. There is a formula that you can kind of go through here, and it kind of describes everything. In the book, this is the example, so I've included it here so that if you're in the book, it'll match that. You can see here a few things I want you to know. One, you're going to have a y-axis and an x-axis. Okay, this orange line here is what we call the production possibilities frontier. That is a line that represents 100% efficiency, meaning we're using all the resources, all the land, all the labor, all the capital that we have. We are not wasting anything when we're producing goods and services. But that's the most we can do at any possibility. And as you see, if you go from point here to point here to point here, those are all 100% capacity. So if you look up here, this is what's possible, and they've just simply charted it. Now, if you are at point B, then you're at a point called underutilization. This is when you're not fully using your resources. Most of the time, you're never going to be at 100%, just simply because workers get sick and don't work 100% of the time all the time. You know, machines break or slow down. So you're always typically going to be in a state of underutilization, but producers are going to try to see what's possible and get as close to this frontier line as possible. Now, if you see these arrows going out to the right, to this purple line, the purple line is not something that is possible. You cannot ever go past the frontier line. The only way to go from the orange line to the purple line is you would have to increase your resources, which would involve you then drawing a new production possibility curve. They've put it on top of here just to show you that to have that possibility of what's at purple and to increase from the orange, it just would take more land, more labor, more capital, better technology. Okay. All right, so every society has 3 economic questions that they have to answer when they're trying to get their needs and their wants met. So before they even decide what goods and services do we produce to meet needs and wants because of the issue of scarcity, they have to ask these 3 questions. What goods and services should we be producing? How should goods and services be produced? And who will consume the goods and services that are produced? And however they answer that will determine what its economic system is, which is the structure and methods and principles societies use to produce goods and services. So you have one here where they might choose to use 1 acre of land, 56 worker hours, and hand tools, and you can see they can get 15 bushels of wheat. Or they might choose to use 1 acre, 2.9 worker hours, and then capital, would be a tractor in this one. And you can see they can produce quite a different amount. Now, every society, while they're answering those questions, they're going to have to weigh out the importance they put on these various economic goals of efficiency, freedom, security, equity or fairness, growth. How are they going to grow the economy? A lot of times this is looking at technology and innovation. They're trying to get a higher standard of living for their people. And other goals. They want to make sure that people are being taken care of. Or you might think about things like the environment. These are all things that are going to have to be weighed out and thought through as they answer those 3 questions. So basically, to answer the 3 questions, they develop a system. Okay. Now, they will consider those economic goals, and they'll come up with one of 4 systems. The traditional system here, which you can read through, or you can go into what we call a free market system. This would be the second one. Make sure that you go through each of these. This is called a circular flow model. This is for a pure free market system. Laissez-faire, meaning the government's not really taking an active role in answering those 3 questions. So you'd see the government's not present, but you do need to know these groups of households and firms. There'll be a video for that. These are some of the advantages and disadvantages, so make sure that you've covered that, as well as know about Adam Smith, which we'll have a reading you can do. The third one would be a centrally planned economy, which we would also call a command economy. Now, this can include the governments of socialism and communism as a means of distributing. Those are quite different, and so study this Venn diagram so you understand the differences. You can have socialism, for instance, in a democracy, but communism and democracy would not work. So you want to go through that because certainly some societies have decided that central planning is the way to go, and we here in the United States have always leaned more towards free market. But both of those don't really truly exist in a pure form. For a free market, the government is always involved at some level, and so you don't have pure free market economies. We say that they're mixed, some level of government involvement. And so here in the United States, while I say that we've always leaned towards a free market system, we do have a government that is mixed up in that, and they will take certain roles in terms of regulation and other things that will certainly infringe upon just what a pure free market stands for. On the other hand, command economies where you have one deciding group deciding all the means of production and who gets what and that sort of thing. While that may be true and countries may certainly lean that way, China, North Korea, and others, there are elements of free market exchanges happening. So every economy is at some level mixed, and it's kind of a spectrum, which I'll show later. But when you talk about a mixed economy, notice that the government now is in this circular flow model, and so that's important. And so make sure you study that. And you'll see that they participate both with the households and the firms. So here's the spectrum I was kind of mentioning. You might have North Korea really hardline on the centrally planned side, where someone like Singapore or Hong Kong would be mostly in the free side. Okay, and you can see the U.S. and Canada are more towards a free market. Canada has some elements of socialism that right now the United States does not. So when you talk about healthcare, for instance, that is government run. So the government's making those decisions of what they're going to produce, how they're going to produce it, and who's going to consume it in that field. They would probably be actually a little bit further to the left of the U.S. on this spectrum. Looking at the United States, this might give you some examples of where we do have government involvement, and so you can read some of these charts. Some of the basic characteristics of free enterprise, know those, and I would know the 5th and the 14th Amendment as it relates to property. So make sure you study the property aspects of those amendments. And you can see some of the key roles both for the consumer, the entrepreneur, and we'll talk about the government here too. And if you notice in the previous slides, those would be the three parts of that circular flow model. Households would be the consumer, firms would be the entrepreneur, and then the government. So here's where we talk a little bit about the government and the idea that they would be involved for the purposes of health, safety, and general well-being of its citizens. These are a number of the agencies, but certainly not all of them. And how they support economic growth. These are some of the goals that the government will get involved in for maximum employment, to help the economy to grow, and to provide stability, particularly when it comes to prices. And so you can read through those. Know the term public versus private. Public will involve the government. Private would be where businesses and individuals interact, but not with the government involved there. And so there's some different terms here you need to know also, like free rider, market failure. Anytime the government produces a good, it's going to be for one of two purposes, and you can see it down there. Make sure you know that. This would be an example of how a government might justify the cost. Remember, we're thinking at the margin, weighing out the costs and the benefits, and so if you look through the situation, the benefits, both for the free market and as a public good, and then you can see the result of either decision, and that's a way of doing a cost-benefit analysis. Externalities is an economic side effect, so anytime the government does choose to do something, there's going to be some economic side effects, both positive and negative. And so if they decide to build a bridge, like on the previous slide, this lists those externalities. Okay, and here's some more you can see. And that the other problem that we're going to really focus on with government is they're going to try to involve themselves when it comes to poverty and welfare, what that means, and this idea of a safety net, which is another example of why we have a mixed economy and not a free market economy. So as you go through the notes, if you have any questions, let me know.